I'm very excited about today's keynote speaker. Peter Kageyama is an expert on community change and what makes people love their community. He is also a special advisor to the AIB Board of Directors. You can learn more about Peter and read his full bio by visiting the speaker section of the conference app. I'm honored to introduce Peter and his symposium session called The Emotional Infrastructure of Places. Welcome, Peter. We're so glad you're here with us today.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to America and Bloom. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, virtually. I know this is a little bit of uncharted territory for us all. Definitely different times, and thank God for the technology. It's great. Not truly a substitute for being in the same room with each other, but for this year, it will have to do. And hopefully, we can still share some good ideas and a bit of camaraderie in all of this as well. So many of you have heard me speak before. Most of you know me as the city love guy. I talk about love and emotional engagement with our places. Why it's a good thing for people to fall in love with their city. That seems like kind of an obvious notion, and in some ways it is. But the truth is that love does matter, and it's not necessarily part of our daily lexicon, the way we think about cities, the way we even talk and act about cities. So I try to be the evangelist, if you will, to get people to accept that love and emotional engagement with place is a valuable and a legitimate thing to be engaged with there. And those of you who've heard me speak before, you know I've written a couple of these books, For the Love of Cities and Love Where You Live, where I lay out the argument and give lots of examples about that sort of notion. And one of the core ideas that I always talk about is sort of trying to define the nature of most people's relationship with their place. And it's not a deep relationship, it's not nearly nuanced, not nearly well thought out. And in fact, I sort of summarize it by saying most people's relationship with their city can be sort of summarized by, or symbolized by, the pothole. Now, nobody likes potholes, right? And we fix potholes in our, and that's this ongoing song and dance there as well. But the point that I make about potholes is that, yes, we will fix them and we must fix them. But there's no emotional return on investment for fixing potholes. Nobody is going to love your city because you fix the potholes. Not to say we're going to stop fixing them, but I think we could agree that we actually need to aspire to something more. And I've shared this with you guys before. Functional and safe is the minimum threshold requirement to be a working community. And when money gets tight, people think, oh, let's make it functional, let's make it safe, and we paint it battleship gray and knock it out the door, and that's good enough. No, it's not. Nobody wants to live in a merely functional, safe, and battleship gray community. So the things that we should aspire to in our places, things like comfort, conviviality, in the sense that our community actually helps facilitate bringing us together and connecting us with each other. Making our cities and our communities interesting, and as I say, making them fun. Fun is a legitimate goal in the work that we do, and it needs to be seen as a legitimate goal for organizations and for cities. Yet too often I think people think, well, cities shouldn't be having fun, they should be fixing more potholes. And again, I will point out that nobody is going to fall in love with your city because you fix the potholes. We expect that. You got to fix the potholes, you got to provide police and fire service, but at heart we know people want something more. And the reason why people actually live in a place, why they are actually going to love a place, is not because of functional and safe. We expect that. It is in those higher aspects. And certainly, I think America and Bloom exists as part of those higher aspects. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Now, the other thing I talked about, and I shared with you guys, is this idea of a love note, the relatively small thing that makes something very special. And again, in my books, I liken them to the idea of the handwritten note that goes with the gift. And all of us have done this. We've given a gift to a significant other, and we've forgotten to give a card or a note with that gift. That is a mistake, because that card, that note means something. It says we take a moment, we make it personal, we make it special, and that small gesture will oftentimes have an outsized impact on the way that person is going to feel about the gift, by extension, the way they feel about us. Love notes, small things with outsized impacts. And I usually share with you guys a lot of examples of different sort of love notes. And one of the ones that I thought was kind of cute and kind of appropriate for this is actually Mill Ends Park in Portland, Oregon. Very small love note. It's this tiny little park, and it's not much bigger than a planter. But for over 60 years, the city and their parks department has taken great pride and great pleasure in maintaining that lovely little park. And certainly if you're a tourist, you think that's adorable. If you're a local, you think, yes, we're very proud of our tiny little park. So again, it is a small thing with an outsized impact in the way we will feel about our places. Love notes, significance, yes, they're actually kind of important. Now, I do actually have a new book, and that's sort of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. It's called The Emotional Infrastructure of Places. And it sort of builds on this idea that I've talked about of love matters, but the things that we build, actually really do have an impact on the way we feel about our places. And of course, that seems kind of obvious, but when I use that word infrastructure, that immediately takes us into a different sort of headspace. Because when I say infrastructure, most of us think about really big stuff, things like bridges, and dams and power grids and airports and all of that really big stuff there. And the thing is I've tried to come up with a different sort of, a notion about what infrastructure actually is. And I believe it is this. It is foundational elements of common and shared purpose. Now, when we think about infrastructure in that way, it seems a little bit more personal to us than before. And the thing about infrastructure is it is literally all around us. Yet it's like background noise. For the most part, we don't think about it. We don't think about, the electricity and the power grid until we walk into a room and we flip the switch and the light doesn't go on. We don't think about the water until it doesn't, turn on or turn off there when we expect it to come out of the faucet. So again, infrastructure is literally all around us, and it is mostly invisible until it fails. Now, I think we need to be thinking about this stuff well before it actually fails, because there are huge opportunities in terms of rebuilding and building newer, better infrastructure. Now, I get when people talk about infrastructure, they say, man, let's not overthink this stuff. Sometimes, it's just a bridge, man. And I get that notion of maybe not wanting to overthink stuff. But here's the thing about infrastructure, is we live with it for a long time. And anything we live with for a long time is going to impact us in ways that sometimes we don't even fully appreciate until many, many years later. Sort of these emergent qualities come out only over time. So anything that we're going to live with in proximity to and affect us that way, I would hope that maybe we're thinking about this stuff in a slightly more holistic sort of way. So it's not just a bridge. And in the case of this particular bridge, it's not. It's actually the 8th Street Bridge in Port Angeles, Washington. And in addition to being a perfectly fine and serviceable bridge, unfortunately, it has also become the epicenter of suicide in this particular community. As part of many communities are dealing with, meth addiction there, and sort of these issues of despair in communities. And sadly, when people reach that point in this particular area, the place that they're going to end their lives is this 8th Street Bridge. So when I visited there, we were talking about this problem, and the city had actually done something that, of course, is very sensible, very logical, very sort of engineering-based sort of their solution. They raised the fences on the bridge, which again is something logically you absolutely should do. But the point that I made to them is, well, in addition to that, what if we thought about this stuff maybe in a different way? I said, how about maybe some artwork, some stencils, some messaging, on the bridge as people walk out there, something that simply says, it gets better, you are loved, call your mother, something like that. That in addition to raising the fences, maybe something like that, having a little bit of emotional intelligence about this, might actually get people into a different headspace and allow for some other things, hopefully, to happen before something really tragic does actually happen. So again, fine, you got to raise the fences, but let's think about this stuff in maybe in a more holistic way. Emotional infrastructure. And that's sort of the core idea that I'm talking about here in the book, that these things, infrastructure, even the most basic of stuff, can actually have an emotional component to it. Now, this has actually been very true, certainly with America and Bloom. I don't think you guys fully appreciate the fact that you guys are in the emotional infrastructure business. Certainly, we look at that streetscape there, and that's actually from Holland, Michigan, one of our great cities and great American Bloom cities. You look at that and go, that's gorgeous. And many cities have similar streetscaping and landscaping, and that's fantastic. This is sort of at the core of what we do. And we look at it, we think that's beautiful, that adds value, certainly. But actually, I believe that has an emotional component as well. Beauty is important to us. Green nature is important to us. And certainly this brings it into a very stark relief for us in seeing this, and we feel this maybe on even unconscious levels. And certainly during the pandemic, this has been even more true. Part of the response to the pandemic, when we sort of were forced to sort of remove ourselves from the world, and slowly as we started to come back, and when we got tired of being in our own homes, the one place that we could actually go was outside into the parks and into green space. And that was an emotional response. And this is emotional infrastructure in our time of need. I have never seen more people in the parks here in St. Petersburg, where I live, than I have in the last few months. Many of you have probably experienced that as well. Some of you probably actually have been out in those parks. Maybe you hadn't been there in a long time, but you've actually had that experience and rediscovering your parks and your green space. We went out and we found the most comfortable benches. You know, we didn't sit too close to each other, but it was important for us to actually be able to see each other and sort of sit back and take in that green and that atmosphere. And certainly there is something about, you know, being in nature that as human beings, we need that. It is this biophilic response that we have, that we feel this connection to other living things, and certainly nature's part of it. Many of us got back on bicycles for the first time in years. You know, we inflated those tires and we got out there on unsteady wheels and we rode onto the trails, and that was a beautiful thing there. And we've rediscovered those trails. Personally, I've rediscovered the Pinellas Trail here in St. Petersburg, where I live, riding bikes and seeing so much more of my community that you don't necessarily see when you walk or when you're there in a car. So again, this kind of stuff has always been important, but certainly in our time of need, this has proven to be necessary emotional infrastructure. Can you imagine if we actually all had to stay literally, you know, locked up in our houses, only to go out maybe to the grocery store or to the doctors? My God, that feels like almost like a prison sentence. There. So our green space has actually acted as that sort of emotional security blanket for us and allowed us to get out there and interact with our environment, and reluctantly and at a distance with each other. This is important stuff. This is necessary emotional infrastructure. And how about this? This is artwork as emotional infrastructure. Now, this may be a little bit of a stretch for most of you, but I think when you see this, you're going to go, okay, I kind of get it. One of the last cities I actually visited before the pandemic really locked everything down back in March was Dunwoody, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. And they have this mural there attached to the Sproul Arts Center there. And it's just really simple. It's been there for about 10 years. It says, everything will be okay. And, you know, I'd be hard pressed to say that's truly artistic. I mean, it's really simple lettering. It's black, it's white there. It's really simple. But the message is incredibly powerful, and it became incredibly meaningful in these last few months. In fact, the city has kind of adopted this as their de facto motto. The police department was using it on those sort of electronic, you know, signs that are out there. And then this was really kind of brilliant. You know, as the pandemic sort of raged on, this message, people, you know, the photos, they were sharing these and sharing this message out there. Well, the art gallery said, you know, there's a lot of artists who are kind of hurting right now. So they came up with this program where they printed these signs, and for a fee, you can buy the sign online, and someone from the art center will take the sign and will deliver it and install it in your yard. And all the money that was raised there actually goes to support local artists. I thought, that's brilliant. Why is that, you know, that mural important now? It's because it resonates with us on an emotional, psychological level. Everything will be okay. All of us have said that to friends, to family, to kids there. And sometimes we need that reassurance as well. And that sort of visual message out there is absolutely emotional infrastructure. So I want us to believe that as part of what America in Bloom does, in addition to all of the work that we do and the way we think about ourselves, I want us to add this to the way we think about ourselves, is we provide necessary emotional infrastructure for places. That this stuff, beauty and this connection to nature, is incredibly important and has been, you know, shown very starkly in the last several months as people have flocked to green space, and the necessity of reconnecting with nature, even when we can't reconnect with each other in meaningful ways. This is important stuff. So this is the work that we do, that we provide emotional infrastructure for places. And this is actually the other core idea of my new book, is actually this, and they are actually related. And it goes back to this idea of solving the small problem. Now, I talk about the love note, which to me is the little thing that has an outsized impact. And the flip side of that is that oftentimes those love notes are actually addressing some problem. And they're offering a small, maybe simple, maybe whimsical, maybe even a silly solution to that. And that's fine there. But solving the small problem is actually kind of an important thing. And I actually started to think about this in the last couple of years when I was writing the book. And the idea of this kind of comes from an interesting place. It comes from The Karate Kid. Now, for my money, The Karate Kid is one of the, maybe even the best martial arts movie ever made. And it's certainly not because of the fight scenes or the choreography. No, Bruce Lee owns that hands down. But in terms of its spirit and what it's trying to teach, and actually the core idea, the core sentiment of martial arts, the Karate Kid is spot on, right? So all of us remember Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Miyagi was the sensei we all wished we had, right? And one of the things that he taught Daniel there, and he was trying to teach him karate because Daniel had kind of a big problem. He was going to get destroyed by the Cobra Kai there. So he had to teach Daniel enough karate so he doesn't get destroyed in the All Valley Teen Karate Championship. And he starts kind of small. So what does he do? He says, wax on, wax off, paint fence, sand the floor, right? These little exercises. And what he's doing is he's making Daniel do this simple thing over and over again, there with this idea of actually teaching him karate. And we all remember that scene where Daniel all of a sudden realizes that he's actually been learning karate the whole time there while he was washing the cars and sanding the fence or sanding the floors and painting the fences and all this kind of stuff. And he does learn enough karate so he doesn't actually get destroyed. And because it's a Hollywood movie, he actually wins the tournament. But that small thing done over and over again actually has the big impact of, again, solving the problem, which is, again, to not get destroyed in this particular karate tournament. So this idea of doing this small thing over and over again actually has a name, and it's called recursion. And this actually comes from computer science, where computer programmers sort of back in the day before there was more object-oriented programming, sort of early days of computer science, when computer power wasn't totally sort of unlimited in kind of the way it is now, where computer scientists had to be, and programmers had to be more elegant and more efficient in what they would do. So what would happen is, they would write computer code that when they had to solve a particular problem, instead of writing that solution out again and again and again, they said, when you get to this particular point, go over here, run this particular little program or this cycle, and then come back and keep going. So it was this sort of call out to this recurring function there that allowed them to sort of solve a bigger problem. So again, solving a small problem over and over again in the context of a bigger problem, recursion. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought, that's kind of brilliant. And I started to look for examples of that outside of computer science. And I found some. And once you start looking for them, you see lots of them as well. And the one that really sort of set me down this path actually occurred in Muncie, Indiana. So in 2017, I visited Muncie, and they shared with me this really wonderful program that had happened in the Whiteley neighborhood. The Whiteley neighborhood is a traditionally African-American neighborhood there in Muncie, and it's the home of the largest city park there in Muncie, Indiana as well. Now, they have a small community development corporation that didn't have a whole lot of money, but was trying to figure out how to make the community a better place. They had about $6,000. Now if I said, hey, you got $6,000 to make the neighborhood better, it's like, oh man, what could we do there? So one of the things that they decided to do was they said, you know what? There's some other stuff that's going on here, but the neighborhood's looking a little shabby, especially the park. Let's spruce it up. Let's paint the park. And they created the Whiteley Year of Color. And they started out by working with the city parks department, and they painted McCulloch Park, which again is sort of the central park of the city. And so they painted the playground, they painted the parks and the benches and the picnic tables there. And they didn't stop there. They started to paint other stuff in the neighborhood. They painted doors and curbs and letter boxes, and the entire community had this sort of facelift of this resurgence of color. And an interesting thing started to happen. Crime went down, not just in the park, but in the neighborhood as a whole, right? In part because, well, the park looked better, so people were more likely to use it, and they were more likely to simply look at it. And because there was more activity going on in the park, that started to sort of scared away the bad activity, and that begat a positive cycle. It's like, oh, more people starting to use the park, it feels better, more safe, more people are gonna come. And because the neighborhoods looked better, people got out of their houses, and when they painted together, they met each other. Don't assume that somebody who lives in the neighborhood knows everybody on the block, no, that's not necessarily the case, but social capital was formed. They worked together, and this whole sense of positivity and possibility starts to move forward. And it all began with a simple coat of paint. So again, something small done over and over again can actually help us solve some of the biggest problems, because they start solving crime and social injustice, and equity, and making this whole neighborhood better. Now, if I said, hey, look, you've got $6,000 to make your neighborhood safer, what the hell can I do with that? That's overtime for one police officer for a few, weeks. It's a couple wheels on a police cruiser. It's half the training for a police dog. Can't do it. But what if you could? What if you start small and you work your way up from there? Recursion there. This is really kind of an important idea. And what America in Bloom does at heart is recursion, the planting of flowers, the planting of trees. Think about this. I believe that America in Bloom has formalized a recursive process. Planting a tree or flowers, it's more than just a gesture. It's an overt act that requires us to roll up our sleeves and get dirty. And planting has been a central pillar to our civilization for thousands of years. It connects us in a visceral and profound way to the work, to the land, and to each other. It's an act of renewal, and it's an act of rebirth. And unlike, painting a mural, it doesn't require any sort of artistic ability. So think about that. That coming together, that core thing of what we do, which again is planting flowers and planting trees. We think of it as beautification and landscaping, and yes, it is. We think of it as community building, yes, it also is. But maybe it actually taps into something even bigger, that maybe this could be part of the cure for what is ailing kind of all of us, all of our cities here together. Now, again, if I said, hey, look, we've got to seal, to help heal the breach that is clearly evident, in our cities, our country today, that we need to help, people address the issues of climate change and social justice, and safety and all this stuff. Man, that's a big ask. And yeah, it is. And if we approach it that way and ask it from the big possibility sort of standpoint, you go, I have no idea where to begin. Well, what if we thought about this, that maybe what we do is actually a core part of that solution, that we do what we do over and over and over again, and we might actually help solve some of those big problems. And we can help our cities to think about what we do in a different way. They think about this as just landscaping and beautification, but it can be so much more. There is a cascade effect that clearly is happening here when we start looking at this idea of recursion. When the Whiteley neighborhood started the idea of sprucing up the neighborhood, they painted the playground, they planted some flowers, they cleaned things up. They didn't know that this other stuff was going to happen, but it did. They started a process there. And maybe part of what we need to do is think about this as one of those catalytic sort of events in this process for communities. Yes, communities have some very big issues, and they're going to face some very big challenges moving forward. I think we're going to see a bit of a crisis in our cities around finances for the next couple of years, because a lot of money has been depleted out of our cities' budgets there for very good reason, but rebuilding that is going to take some time. So in the midst of all of this sort of financial challenges, cities are going to be looking hard at the programs that they do. So they're going to be looking for stuff that has long-term impacts beyond maybe the most obvious. And I think we have an opportunity to step into that breach and be part of that solution, and showcase that to the cities if we can talk to them and get them to understand this stuff in a different way. That it's not just about the flowers, it's not just about the trees, it's not just about beautification of the landscape, that something bigger is actually going on there. I know it. I think you guys know it intuitively, and hopefully by sort of giving a voice to this and giving a name to it, maybe you can help articulate that and look for those examples where the work that you've done actually had an impact that you had no idea it was going to be so profound on a particular neighborhood. So I'm going to leave you with this particular thought. And this is something that's become personally meaningful to me in the last several years there. And certainly it is part of what you guys do, what we do, is to do small things with great love. Because small things done with great love manifestly feel different. American Bloom, we're not about necessarily the big thing. We are very much about the small thing. But I think the small thing that can unlock the big thing there, it's the thing that gets you to the thing, to quote a TV show that I used to really, really like there as well. Do small things with great impact or with great love. It feels different there. That's the challenge for us moving forward. And I believe that we can be part of this resurgence, this rebirth, this renewal in our cities, in our communities that absolutely has to happen. And maybe people don't even realize what's going on at the same time. They think they're just out planting some flowers, and that's fine. But at heart, we know that by doing that, by being part of that experience, they're part of a community, they are part of a process, that we can take them to places that they didn't even know actually existed, and that they actually want to go. And I think that is sort of the rare opportunity that we have, and that's part of the genius of what America in Bloom does. So I thank you guys very, very much for the opportunity to continually engage with you guys. You stretch my own thinking, you reinforce my belief in cities and in people. By the nature of the volunteer work that you guys do. You guys love your places, and it shows there, and that gives me, inspiration as well. So thank you very much, America in Bloom. Keep up the great work.